Welcome to What's the Big Book Actually Saying for Step 12. Now, this is the fourth video in what will be a 5-part video series on Step 12. What a chock full of nuts chapter of the Big Book our Step 12 Working with Others chapter is. And the book starts to assume that the newcomer has done the steps, and they're starting to put the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, into all their affairs. And this is definitely the flavour of the rest of this chapter. Yes, the advice is still in this portion of the Big Book for the older sober member on how to work with the newcomer, but it almost starts to become generally good advice for any alcoholic. So as I say here, we're looking at you can see it bolded there in the step from page 60, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So it goes beyond just pure application of the steps in various parts of our life. It becomes more of a general way of life section. This next section of working with others is all about encouraging the prospect to live a spiritual, God-given, God-driven life. It's also a reminder of how we too must practice these principles in all our affairs. So let's look at life as a recovered alcoholic with a good God-conscious connection with a higher power. All right, here we go. And I've given each of these various sections, these short sections of the Big Book, usually a paragraph or two, a heading to make it, I think, a little bit easier to see the theme. Again, nothing more than I would do with the sponsee. Okay, so this next section is about living spiritually at home, blah, blah, blah. So living spiritually at home. Now, the Big Book says, the domestic problem, which we all have. We're all living somewhere, most of us. I know some alcoholics come into the rooms living nowhere, but they tend, in my experience, to end up living somewhere, sometimes later, sometimes sooner. Now, the domestic situation. There may be a divorce, separation, or just strained relations. When your prospect has made such reparation as they can to their family, which implies they've made their amends, and has thoroughly explained to them the new principles by which they are living. In other words, hey, I'm doing the steps, I've done the steps, I'm now living a God-conscious life, I'm going to AA. They should proceed to put these principles into action at home. Of course they should. We have to put all of these principles into action, not just at home, but everywhere. Good advice for all of us in recovery. That is, if they are lucky enough to have a home, though the family be at fault in many respects, they should not be concerned about that. So there's a reinforcing point that goes all the way back to our initial step 4 work. Okay, we look at our side of the street, not theirs. They should concentrate on their own spiritual demonstration. Argument and fault finding are to be avoided like the plague. This almost feels like a literal reiteration of some of the advice we received through the Step 4 inventory part of the Big Book. Let's move on to the family wanting to go along. So let's look at the other side of the coin, the family that's quite keen on where this recovered alcoholic is heading. After they have seen tangible results, the family will perhaps want to go along. Go along with what? The spiritual life that the alcoholic is now on. These things will come to pass naturally and in good time provided. However, the alcoholic continues to demonstrate that they can be sober, considerate, and helpful regardless of what anyone says or does. What a fantastic reiteration of what being sober and recovered is all about. Yeah, I've got to be sober, but I've also got to be considerate and helpful no matter what happens to me. And again, it's that lovely reiteration that, our life may not be fantastic just because we're sober. It's going to still be a life. But regardless, our reaction to it, our thinking about it, our perception of it is completely changed because we're on this path, this spiritual path. Of course, we all fall much below this standard many times. Another slight reiteration, perhaps, that we don't just take steps 6 and 7 once. It's a continual, there's that defect of character of God. Again, please take it away again, God. This is a bad day. I've had days in recovery that situationally were worse than days I had drinking. We all have bad days, but regardless, we now have a system, a way of living that allows us to react to those days differently. This is, of course, what this section of the big book is talking about. So, of course, we fall much below the standard of being, well, perhaps not sober, but considerate and helpful regardless of what anyone says and does many times. But we must try to repair the damage immediately, lest we pay the penalty by a spree. So intent and willingness are very much a part of our recovery. Let's look at divorce, or your version of divorce if you don't happen to believe in marriage or happen to be married. If there be divorce or separation, there should be no undue haste for the couple to get together. The recovering alcoholic should be sure of their recovery. The spouse or partner should fully understand their new way of life. So we don't shut anybody out about, we don't keep it a secret what we're doing. We actually disclose. If their old relationship is to be resumed, it must be on a better basis. Since the former did not work. This means a new attitude and spirit all around. Sometimes it is to the best interest of all concerned that a couple remain apart. Obviously, no rule can be laid down. Let the alcoholic continue their program day by day. So there's a lovely, subtle reminder that every day we wake up and ask God for guidance. What would you have me do today? I have to catch up with my ex. We are currently separated. Just don't help me try and shoehorn my expectations into it. Give me your expectations, God, and I'll try and put them into the conversation. Let's just see where this heads. There's a really lovely spirit in this paragraph as to how our new way of thinking, perceiving and living can impact a marriage that's in a fluctuating state. Recovery no matter what is the next heading I've come up with. Let no alcoholic say they cannot recover unless they have their family back. This just isn't so. In some cases, the spouse or partner will never come back for one reason or another. Remind the prospect that their recovery is not dependent on people, it is dependent upon their relationship with God. So there's another reiteration, a reminder that we have to start hearing God, asking God for advice, really practicing the principles of 12-step recovery in our life, and moving beyond the need for affirmation and approval and checking in all the time with other people and their opinions and perceptions. God's perception wins out. This is the suggestion here. Now, I sometimes hear members call this tiny little section of the big book the 12-step promises. And what's interesting is they occur in the middle of this section on our spiritual way of living as we practice the principles in all our affairs. But let's read them as promises. And this is not me telling you to consider them as such. It's not as if our step 8 and 9 promises, the famous ones, are called promises per se, or there's a subheading going, these are the promises. That's something that the membership has arrived at through their perception of their value. I love these promises as they read to me and where I am in my recovery. Both you and the new member must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. If you persist, remarkable things will happen. When we look back, we realize that the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have planned. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances. Why am I not reading this every morning? I have no idea. Reading it now, it's so profound. And what I also like about this little section, I think it's worth pointing out what the big book's actually saying here. It starts with both you and the new member. Now you're aligned. Now you are truly equal. The new member's done enough work. They've arrived where you currently are at. They've got a God consciousness. They're trying to work their program and turn it into a complete way of life, a new way of thinking, feeling, and being, which means They're no better or no worse than you. In fact, in my personal experience, I've had sponsees who have hit this point and sometimes even sooner ring me up and they're having a much better day than I am. And I don't just mean in terms of their life situation, the way they're actually processing and seeing life is often more positive than mine. And you go, oh, okay, this is really humbling. What are you, 6 months sober? I'm over 10 years sober and you're having a better day. You're seeing things more positively and spiritually than me. Ha! Thank you, God, for the reminder that, we hit this sweet spot of now we're all on the same page. Our willingness, our God consciousness is enough so that we can start to really practice the principles in all our affairs. And on that rather motivational note, for me at least, I hope for you, have a happy sober day, and we'll pick up where we left off in the next video. Cheers.